All right. Need a motion to do the consent agenda for the minutes, list of bills, and treasurer's report, unless we wish to have them separated.
Second.
Mr. Martin?
Aye.
Mrs. Allen? Aye. Mr. Lucas?
Aye.
Mr. Skorzinski?
Aye.
Mr. Cronin?
Aye.
Mr. Jevons?
Aye.
Mr. Satori?
Aye, motion carried. And we need a motion to approve the Grundy preschool program.
I'll make the motion we approve the Grundy County preschool program.
Second.
I'll second.
Discussion.
Mr. Skorzinski?
Aye.
Mr. Lucas?
Aye.
Mrs. Allen? Aye. Mr. Martin?
Aye.
Mr. Cronin?
Aye.
Mr. Jevons?
Aye.
Mr. Satori?
Aye, motion carried. Our action items, we have resignations listed there. Need a motion to approve those resignations.
I'll make a motion we accept the resignations as presented.
Second.
Mr. Skorzinski?
Aye.
Mr. Martin?
Aye.
Mrs. Allen? Aye. Mr. Lucas?
Aye.
Mr. Cronin?
Aye.
Mr. Jevons?
Aye.
Mr. Satori?
Aye, motion carried. We have a list, or leave of absence. Need a motion to approve the leave of absence listed.
Second.
Mr. Martin?
Aye.
Mr. Jevons?
Aye.
Mrs. Allen? Aye. Mr. Lucas?
Aye.
Mr. Skorzinski?
Aye.
Mr. Cronin?
Aye.
Mr. Satori?
Aye, motion carried. Staffing, we have Minooka CCSD program assistant position. Leave that one.
Second. We did receive a request for personnel action from Ms. Stott, Special Education Director, to add a program assistant at MPC. I believe the documentation is there in the report.
Need a motion to approve that.
So,
Second.
Mr. Martin?
Aye.
Mrs. Allen? Aye. Mr. Lucas?
Aye.
Mr. Skorzinski?
Aye.
Mr. Cronin?
Aye.
Mr. Jevons?
Aye.
Mr. Satori?
Aye, motion carried. We also have a listing of employment personnel in various positions listed. Need a motion to approve those unless you wish to have them separated.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Mr. Lucas?
Aye.
Mr. Martin?
Aye.
Mrs. Allen? Aye. Mr. Skorzinski?
Aye.
Mr. Cronin?
Aye.
Mr. Jevons?
Aye.
Mr. Satori?
Aye, motion carried. And we have approval of fiscal year 2015 audit that you heard at the committee of the whole. Motion to approve that audit.
I'll make the motion we approve the audit as presented to us.
Second.
Skorzinski?
Aye.
Mr. Martin?
Aye.
Mrs. Allen? Aye. Mr. Lucas?
Aye.
Mr. Cronin?
Aye.
Mr. Jevons?
Aye.
Mr. Satori?
Aye, motion carried. We have the request for junior high Chromebook cards, and it's approximately $1,000, I believe it was $3,190, so $3,190. Need a motion to approve that?
we have the,
Is there a second?
the motion on the floor first.
Second.
Good.
Now, from the committee, I think there were questions as to what was happening in the classroom with the technology. Could we get someone from the junior high to?
Absolutely. Well, we travel in a pack, so we'll both come.
Yes.
Just so you guys can laugh at the height. It's always good for a laugh.
So one of the questions was, what are the types of things that the Chromebooks are used for in the classrooms?
Variety of things. If you're talking language arts, the kids are using them, of course, to type papers, to do research on, if you're persuasive essays, then you're researching different opinions, different points of view, different evidences, if you will, to support a claim. Science class, Ms. Schmidt could have stuck around and told you some of the cool labs that they do, and are able to do some virtual dissections. I know we're not purchasing frogs this year, so they're going to use more of the computer component, if you will, to do some of the dissections. Social studies class, Mr. Heap's doing a debate next week, so the kiddos are researching for those in, in the social studies class. Ms. McKinney started a speech class this year in our fine arts rotation, and the kiddos, in addition to just giving, this is who I am, here's my bag, let me tell you a little bit about me speeches, they also do some research and informative speeches and things of that nature, so they use them in the fine arts rotation as well as your core classes, language, math, of course. We've got digits at the 8th grade and 7th grade level. We've got one teacher that's actually teaching, it's been flying around all night. We've got one teacher that's actually teaching in a computer lab, and she's limping along on those, but the teachers that do use the Chromebooks have greater success with the speed, if you will. So the math teachers like to box out on some of those carts as much as they can. The language arts teachers are fighting tooth and nail for them as well. So when Aaron came to us and we talked a little bit about the tech in the building, I'll be honest with you, the teachers would rather not use the ACERs that we have and just kind of scrap a lesson for the day because they do have so much trouble with them for the things that they want to do. They'd rather not use them than, they can hold out for a Chromebook cart that they can steal from a neighbor, if you will. I know we do have Chromebook carts that are department specific, so to speak. But again, I know one of our language arts teachers uses it for a portion of the morning. She teaches a split, if you will, a little bit of 7th, a little bit of 8th. She used it for a lesson, and then one of the social studies teachers snagged it for the 30 minutes left of the class for the rest of the day. She just had a kid come down and transport that cart. So there's a lot of stealing from Peter to pay Paul with the carts that we do have in the building. And they are, like I said, a pretty hot commodity every day. We have another computer lab that's used regularly as well. Just 1,000 kiddos in the building, and we're trying to push the use of technology and research and things of that nature as much as possible.
Do they use the research off the internet or on the app?
The internet is where they're going to do their research from.
And a big part of the focus throughout all the curriculums has been using primary sources. So enabling the students to access the Smithsonian or the Library of Congress directly and find the primary source to analyze and to cite has been a big advantage of the classes that have access to those. And then additionally within the writing, using the Google apps to share and comment and revise each other's writings within the classroom has been something that we've seen quite a bit of positives coming from.
So Ms. Massey, you raised a concern. Why are we not buying frogs and doing digital dissection instead of hands-on dissection?
Here's the beauty of purchasing the computers. That computer is not an expendable thing. So at the end of the year, we don't have to repurchase frogs for the next year. We'll be able to milk those computers for a little while longer, if you will.
But don't you think there's something lost by not doing it hands-on?
You know what, I was the guy that took the notes in the background. There was no touching of the frog for me, so I appreciate the virtual dissection. And they actually, if you get a better view of the organs, because the kids don't have any. I saw it, it's really cool, actually. It's gross, but cool. So.
There's been a high degree of student engagement with them too. I think the students respond well at our age to that technology. They're learning the same tools from dissecting the frog or virtually dissecting the frog, but they're really buying into the process on computers. And then like Ms. Massey said, we're able to utilize those across the board as opposed to just, we don't use the frogs in math class afterwards. So that's been one of the benefits that we've seen. But I was a frog learner, so I appreciate that tactile response. But I think that overall there's some benefits there. We appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Mrs. Allen? Mr. Lucas?
Aye.
Mr. Martin?
Aye.
Mr. Skorzinski?
Aye.
Mr. Cronin?
Aye.
Mr. Jevons?
Aye.
Mr. Satori?
Aye. Motion carried. We have board policy 7:40, the third reading. Has to do with the sports.
Homeschool participation and extracurricular activities.
This is the third reading. Need a motion to approve the third reading.
I would like to make a motion, we approve the third reading. However, the information that was given to us by our attorneys to add, to include in it, that needs to be included in that policy. So that would be the change from the second reading to this reading.
Yeah, you have a clean copy that incorporates the attorney's edits.
Okay. So that'll be the change from the last reading.
That is what has changed between
And
second.
so that's my motion.
Yes.
Second? awardings from October of 2013.
So moved.
Second. Mr. Lucas?
Aye.
Mrs. Allen? Aye. Mr. Martin?
Aye.
Mr. Skorzynski?
Aye.
Mr. Cronin?
Aye.
Mr. Jevons?
Aye.
Mr. Satori?
Aye, motion carried. Dr. Collins.
In my 1 minute or less, I've got just nothing but good news. One, because of the reallocation of Title I funds, we received an additional $105,000 on our Title I, and has to be used for particular schools. Obviously, it's based on percentage of low income. We range from 38% to a low of 3%. Unfortunately, the 18% school is one of our elementary schools, so technically I can't use the money for that school. However, and finally, I just wanted to point out to you, I put a rather large paragraph about the kids login and getting into SIS and getting all the kids in there and all that stuff, and I had a real hang up about it the day that I wrote this thing. And 2 days after it was, or a day after it was mailed to you, we got it all fixed. We have every one of our kindergarten kids is in SIS. All the teachers who have attended the 2-day workshop all have their passwords and logins, and they're able to put in information into the DRDP for the kids. They extended the window a little bit longer, so we are in good shape there for first time through. This year is still a practice year. Next year we have to put in all of it, and then the third year after that, it's not for everybody, it's not an option. So we're ahead of the game again, and we feel good about where we are. That's it. It was
You
less
got
than
it.
that.
Did he time that?
I timed
Did he do it less than a minute?
Okay, Dr. Mock, you got that?
Mine will not quite be less than 60 seconds. Quick follow-up, please note on Steph's report, you are all invited to attend our staff development day on Friday. We start off all together as a group, and then everyone breaks out into various different sessions, and so you're welcome to attend any of those.
We have a stimulating opening session right off the bat at 8:45 or 8:40, so please come to that if you have time.
That's what he calls the superintendent's remarks. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's what I meant, really.
So a couple of quick items. We continue to bargain with the MESP Association. I think we had 3 sessions since the last time we all met, but we're proceeding well. We're starting to sign off on a couple of some of the smaller stuff. We think we finished up with some language items on, but we're still ongoing. We've got a couple more sessions within the next few weeks. So progress is being made. Don't have an end date in mind yet, but we are rolling along. And when we enter closed session, I can give you a little bit more of the details involved there. Already touched on Transportation and Finance Committee. Wanted a celebration we didn't really talk about, but the fall sports banquet that happened on the 19th, Mrs. McCarroll did an outstanding job of bringing in all of the teams for a big celebration, and they all kind of broke apart and did their own individual team awards. I was there, Mr. Skorzynski assisted in handing out some of the certificates, and we got to kind of walk around and listen to how the coaches were celebrating the accomplishments of the athletes. So it was a really nice night, first time they had done that. So we already have some takeaways about how many seats to put down and where to. It was the first time blues, but overall I think everybody enjoyed the evening. You have the regular reports for enrollment updates, staffing updates, employee benefit plan renewals. We will have those to you at the November meeting. We believe we fully expect that we will be able to keep our premium rates stable yet again. We are currently funding our plan quite well. We have asked for the option of raising our specific deductible up from $90,000 to $100,000. We have very few large claims. So far this year, we still haven't had someone that exceeded that, so we believe it could just be some nice savings for the plan without really bringing much risk to us. So we are waiting on one last update from a different carrier that we may engage for the aggregate stop loss insurance, but we expect we'll be renewing the blues again as we have for quite a few years. Let's see. Then, oh, one other celebration. I think many of you attended, but the Beta Club had a new induction last week, so we got to be a part of that and see all of the new inductees into the Junior High Beta Club, the Junior Beta Club. Mayor Brennan gave the keynote address, so it was a nice event for the students and families. So congrats again to the Junior High for bringing some more leaders into the fold. We look forward to watching them grow. And now for the part that everybody likes, talking about the upcoming tax levy. So at the Finance Committee, we started talking about the different options that we have looking for this year's levy. And there's a couple of areas that we will specifically need to address. The first thing is kind of what was brought up in the audit, and the fact that we have a natural deficit within our tort fund we have a deficit in the fund balance of just over $1 million, as well as this year we budgeted about $650,000 worth of revenues, yet we expense about $1.5 million on the expense side. So there's a natural imbalance there. What we talked about at the Finance Committee is that the tort fund is an area where there is no maximum cap on tort expenses. So we talked about the various scenarios of do we maintain the status quo and still levy the same types of amounts. That doesn't really solve the problem. It keeps our tax rate very stable year over year. It doesn't really address the problem. Then we talked about, okay, what if we were to increase the amount of the tort rate? What would that do to the overall tax levy? In these preliminary documents, it looks like that would add about 12 cents to the tax rate from what it was last year. We went further and even started talking about, do we also levy the maximum in the life safety fund? We're allowed to levy a nickel. Last year we only levied half of a cent. So what would that do to the tax rate? And then the Finance Committee actually said, well, not only do we need to just get our tort fund solvent, but we also need to account for the deficit that's already there. So the subsequent scenarios that you have there, I just laid out scenarios 1, 2, and 3 as you're flipping through these. The subsequent scenarios take a couple of approaches to also addressing the deficit. So the first one adds an additional $1 million in the tort fund to wipe out the deficit all in 1 year. The second one takes a more phased-in approach where we do this over 2 years. Because as you heard from Mr. Myers, we are allowed to run a deficit fund balance in the tort fund. We can't have a negative cash balance, but so long as we're taking steps to eliminate that deficit, that would be a manageable approach. And then finally, let me stop there and kind of walk through what these scenarios look like. So in each of the scenarios, I give you 3 options as they go across, low, medium, and high, and that refers to what happens with our total property value, the EAV. In the low scenario, I've got the EAV as stable to last year. Everything that we've seen from the 3 counties indicate we could see anywhere from a 5 to 7% increase in our EAV over last year. Even accounting for what they've given us, dropping another 2.5% or so, the middle area, it would still be a 3.9% increase over last year. So I've kind of marked that as some of the typical things that you can see in appeals. And then the high EAV would be if the numbers they give us hold true through all appeals. You can see in each of those, it has a different effect on the overall tax rate, because a lot of our, so these torts in the municipal retirement, we levy an amount, and then if the EAV is higher, obviously the rate goes down. So in each of the scenarios I described, I kind of show you what it would look like based on a low EAV, a middle EAV, and if the high EAV came to pass. So again, we're not taking action tonight. I'm just trying to put some thoughts in your head as to some of the things that we'll need to talk about when we put a levy up in a tentative format in the month of November. The other thing that I wanted you to be aware of, that I kind of mentioned in the memo, is one of the dark clouds hanging over districts and their finances as they're going into their levies is the aspect of the statewide property tax freeze. There's 2 or 3 different bills that have worked their way through one house of the legislature, and it would take the property tax extension limitation law, which is known as the tax cap, and it would implement it statewide. The tax cap came out in 1991 in the Collar County surrounding Cook. It was added to Cook in 1993, and then all other counties were given the option of adopting the tax cap. Grundy County has never done so, so we are not a tax cap district. This would take the freeze and put it statewide, and then it would put a 0% inflator for the next 2 years, to where your taxes in the aggregate, forgetting bond and interest, but your normal taxes, your operating taxes, would not be able to grow over the next 2 years. The problem that causes for our district in particular is that we've been relatively low in our EAV cycle. We're getting about $4 million less in operating taxes than we were about 5 or 6 years ago, which means if they installed this cap, it would be at one of our lowest levels, in the past 10 years. We are seeing positive growth right now, but we're still relatively low. What this is forcing a lot of districts to consider is really trying to maximize the amount of funds that they do levy this year, because the legislation would make this year the base year. So we're seeing districts talk about this having the exact opposite effect, where instead of lowering taxes, it's forcing districts to where this would be new to even levy more than they otherwise would, simply so they establish a higher base from which all other years come from. So we've been told when we speak to our legislative leaders, they don't really think this is going to pass, but we've heard that before, and they tend to move things very fast when they get the political momentum, and we still feel like this could be a very easy thing for them to add into whatever grand budget deal gets finalized in March or April, whenever the state budget finishes up. So I gave you one final scenario, which is scenario 6. That actually adds even a little bit more to IMRF and Social Security in an attempt to even maximize those funds a little bit more. That's not a good scenario, but it's one that would put the district in a sounder position going forward if they were to adopt a tax freeze. So I only brought the first 3 scenarios of the Finance Committee, where I said status quo, let's make tort solvent, and then let's add in some life safety. Those were scenarios 1, 2, and 3. Based on their discussion, I brought you the scenario 4 and 5, which talks about also addressing the deficit of the tort fund. So looking to get a little bit of feedback so that when we craft a recommendation for November, we are adhering to your thoughts.
If we were to increase it beyond our actual needs, is there a possibility of rebating it if we did?
Yeah, there would be means.
How would that affect our tax cap because we rebated it?
When people get into tax abatements under the tax cap, they always take the maximum amount in their operating funds, but then they abate that to your bond and interest fund, where you basically use it to make some of the bond payments for that year. That way you don't limit yourself year over year, but you do lower the effect on the homeowner and the property taxpayer, the businesses and the residences. So there are ways to do that. There's another aspect of the property tax freeze that also affects bonds, and I'm having Tammy Shalmo from PMA kind of help me write up a memo. I understand the mechanics of it, but it gets into a lot of non-referendum debt, and then they create something called the debt service extension base that I've had to work through before, but rather than try to verbally walk you through it tonight, there's just another aspect that a potential property tax freeze would bring to us, but it doesn't affect what you would have to levy in November and December.
So
I have a thought. We live in a state where over the last 30 years, our legislators have allowed us to spend more money than we have and borrow money from other funds to make it look like we were doing all right. Kind of like what we have right now in tort. We're in a hole pretty far. And what they've done over the last 30 years is push all those bills farther ahead to people who were never born yet that they'll have to pay this off. We can continue running a negative balance in tort, but sooner or later it's going to have to be paid. It'll have to come up And people who didn't incur any of those bills will be the people who have to pay them. So the last couple of scenarios where we start bringing tort back to a stable number, probably is the best thing to do. It's the right thing to do. You know, it may mean more money to taxpayers now, but they're the ones that are receiving the benefit of it right now. 5 years from right now, the taxpayers didn't receive any of these benefits, but they're paying for it.
It should also be noted that if we add anything to the tort levy to account for the current deficit, that's a 1 or 2 year, bump. As soon as that deficit is erased, the need for those additional taxes goes away. So you should see a decrease in rate down the road if you were to go down that path.
Okay, but I think it also should be noted that the reason that we have a deficit is that we're pushing, or we have pushed, otherwise, expenses that otherwise would be in the education fund into tort. I mean, for a couple of years, we levied $650,000 in the tort immunity fund. And that just so happens to coincide about with what we pay in terms of insurance. But then, one of the things that we did was push, and I'm not saying I agree with it because I didn't at the time, and one of the reasons I voted against the levies, we pushed expenses from the education fund into tort, which is what created the deficit. And school districts commonly use that as a method to get around the limitation in the ed fund. Because right now we're levying the maximum rate in our ed fund. So by pushing expenses into tort, which doesn't have a maximum rate, we're pushing part of our ed deficit into tort, and now saying we have to pay it off. So we're in effect completing the end run around the limit in the ed fund.
I just want to respond briefly to that, is that, yes, we do take expenses from ed and O&M, but they are allowable expenses that can be charged to tort.
No, I understand that they're allowable.
It's not, we aren't getting around, but it does lower the ed fund deficit and creates a deficit in a different fund.
Yes,
Yeah.
in a fund where you don't have to go for a referendum to increase the rate.
Yes.
So effectively, we talk about pushing the balloon. We've taken a deficit that otherwise would be in the ed fund, put it in the tort immunity fund, and now we can levy without asking the taxpayers to approve the levy. So whether we put legitimate expenses, expenses that were legitimate based on the state standards, regardless of that, effectively what we have done is taken that deficit, put it into a fund where we don't have to ask the taxpayers to approve the increased rate.
So back to our referendum.
In effect.
Other thoughts?
Is this tax freeze going to eliminate our need to levy?
No, there's still always the need to file the annual levy. If you're asking for more than 5% over the previous year, the Taxation Act still applies. So no, it would simply cap the amount on an annual basis of your aggregate taxes that you can receive. It limits your increase, not necessarily your requirements under the levy requirements and statutes.
And it limits the increase by absolute dollar.
Yes.
Not rate.
Exactly. And it only limits the district's aggregates, not the individual tax bill.
Okay, anyone else?
No, I didn't get a ton of feedback here. So based on what Finance Committee recommended, we'll probably bring you a recommendation that includes trying to offset some of the current deficit in the tort fund. So we will work with our leadership team to make sure we finalize all of our time studies to exactly ironclad exactly what our tort expenses are. We'll bring you that recommendation, and then we can deliberate more in November.
Well, I guess in that vein, let me give you at least my feedback. Obviously, I didn't I didn't agree with pushing that deficit toward immunity fund. But I would suggest that whatever you do, we be cognizant of how that's going to affect individual taxpayers' bills and make the impact as manageable as possible. And that when we no longer need the money, we no longer levy it.
I agree. When I present levy information, I try to talk about it in terms of what it might do to someone's tax bill. Because at the end of the day, that's what the end user is concerned about. We can talk rates and aggregate dollars. So at the bottom of each of these, and there are copies for others too. I'm sorry I didn't have them out there. I try to take a look at what the effect on a $200,000 house would be in each of these scenarios. So you can see the year-over-year increase there. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Board topics.
Well, I did have a board topic, but now I'm a little concerned. I mean, I voted in favor of the Chromebooks because of many of the things that they were speaking about. I agree with the primary sources, the using for research and all that. But I am troubled that we're using the technology for things that I think is better learned hands-on. So I just like us all to be cognizant of that.
Yeah, why have we get rid of the frog?
Because the frogs didn't like it.
Because too many people.
We kept getting them without
We
rights.
had to be grossed out when we were kids.
In other words, we're using.
Well, I think technology works in some things and not in others, and we need to differentiate between those things so that our students are getting the best education they can be getting. You know, we're not replacing quality in favor of just always going to the computer.
The same argument that we use for calculators, right?
Not quite.
I
mean, you still need to know how to, before you learn how to use this computer, you have to learn how to use this computer. And that's my point.
Input, output.
So if we go to online PE courses, you'd probably be.
I'd have a huge problem with that.
This problem is really topic. If we're putting for money, is there any way we can divert money from the athletic activities and put it into the computer program? Because computers, that's what the kids are using for the rest of their life, playing basketball and baseball.
There's no easy answer to that. The board can allocate funds, between programs as they see fit when they adopt the budget. Diverting money away from athletic activities or the extracurriculars to do that, we'd either then have to reduce the number of programs or we'd have to increase the fees to support those programs. Is the only kind of ends of that equation. And if that's something the board wants us to look at, is increasing fees to, lower the board's contribution towards those, activities, we can prepare some reports on that.
One thing that you didn't talk about, Dr. Mono, was the funding the life safety improvements.
Yes, okay. So one of the things that I mentioned in my report on the audit was that it does look like we are going to have about $2.3 million worth of life safety projects that need to get completed over the next 5 years. The final number isn't quite settled yet, so some of that could shift. But we do have about $1.2 million in the life safety fund, so obviously those are there, as would any subsequent levies that we make in the life safety fund. So there's a base of projects there. Also, I went back and did the history of the capital projects fund to try to figure out when money came in, when money came out. Mr. Martin forwarded me the language that talks about abating from capital projects into O&M, so I kind of followed that transfer logic. But it seems like if we assume that the projects that we've been doing on an annual basis have been using impact fees as they've been coming in, there would still be a good $2.3 million. Basically the balance of the capital projects fund could be used also to support life safety projects. We could transfer that to O&M and then fund the project projects that way. So it seems like we have adequate resources to do the projects that we have to do in 5 years. It doesn't yet account for the projects that are supposed to be done in those years 5 to 10, because there will be another chunk of funds there. That's why we're still considering maintaining a life safety levy to at least grow funds for ongoing projects. We do have an executive session to discuss employment compensation for individual personnel, pending or imminent litigation, as well as collective bargaining matters. But there will be no action.
Executive session, please.
Make the motion, we go into executive session.
Second.